Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're calling in from. We're coming to you live from Denver, Colorado, where Stable Seas project is. I'm helped here by Maisie Pigeon, part of the Stable Seas staff. So welcome to the launch of the 2019 State of Piracy report. This report is authored by the Stable Seas program of the One Earth Future Foundation, and it's supported by the Global Maritime Crime Program of the UN Office on Drugs and Crime. My name is John Huggins, and I'm honored to be the moderator for this webinar. You may remember me as the director of Oceans Beyond Piracy, which originally published the report. This will be the 10th edition, so it's great to see that the report continues, and it's getting better than ever, of course. I'm also a former Navy officer, and I continue to be involved in maritime security issues. So very briefly, the agenda for today. So first, we'll have a presentation on the report by Liddell Joubert, who's the primary author from the Stable Seas program. This will be followed by a distinguished panel of maritime security experts from across the globe. We'll also be addressing your questions during Q&A. So for this, I would ask that you use the Q&A function that you'll find on your display at the bottom. So you can start typing those in as soon as the presentations start. And we'll be looking at them here. Of course, we can't get to all of them, but Maisie and I will be sorting through some of the questions that we can ask the panelists at the end of the panel. So again, that's looking at your Q&A button and typing your questions in there. And because we can't get to them all, and we know we have a lot of maritime security experts tuning in, we want to make sure that we capture some of these thoughts. So we'll be putting out a very short summary a day or two after the events of some of the questions and comments that we've received. So getting to the program, first I'd like to introduce Ms. Siri Bune. She is from the UN Office on Drugs and Crime, who is, of course, supporting this. She's the deputy head of the UNODC Global Maritime Crime Program. She focuses on strategy, policy, advocacy, and program development and staff management. She works across the globe, but has an emphasis on the Mediterranean, Southeast Asia, and West and Central Africa. Ms. Bune has worked for the UNODC in Vienna, Abuja, Nigeria, and is currently in Colombo, Sri Lanka, although she's calling in from Norway today. And now I'll turn it over to Siri for her comments. Siri, the floor is yours.
Thank you, John. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody. And welcome to this virtual launch of the State of Maritime Piracy 2019 report, which, as John mentioned, is a partnership between the One Earth Future Foundation, Stable Seas, and United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, and a Global Maritime Crime Program. Let me start by extending our thoughts to all seafarers currently out at sea, who are not only facing threats of attacks, but are also suffering under the COVID-19 pandemic situation by being unable to disembark and therefore are stranded at sea with crew and passengers at risk of being exposed to infection. Due to the unprecedented circumstances, including restricted travel options, this launch event is a virtual gathering compared to previous years, where the report has been launched in the margins of great global events. For this year, we had planned for a side event at the UN Ocean Conference, which was to take place in Portugal in June. That would have been a nice occasion to mark the report's 10th anniversary, though this virtual event serves as a good alternative as it allows for more participants to attend who will have a chance to listen to the great panel who will be speaking later. The State of Maritime Piracy 2019 report marks the 10th year that the One Earth Future Foundation has assessed the human cost of piracy. Over the last 10 years, the report has evolved from being first a project of Oceans Beyond Piracy to now belonging to the Stable Seas program. UNODC and the Global Maritime Crime Program often refers to the findings in these reports as the baseline data for our programming, and we further work closely with Stable Seas on other maritime crime threat assessments, which ensures solid data and a good overview of the current state of play. This State of Maritime Piracy 2019 report portrays a picture where piracy is still a great concern to seafarers, with the Gulf of Guinea remaining the area worst affected. It further states that the threats of piracy off the coast of Somalia is not eradicated, but rather only suppressed. Kidnappings of crew on fishing vessels by Abu Sayyaf and associated groups continued in the Zulu Sea, and robbery and attempted robbery of commercial vessels increased in the Strait of Malacca and Singapore. Further, violent kidnappings and armed robbery incidents were reported in Latin America and the Caribbean, and we will hear more about these findings from Liddell. I would like to highlight that the UNODC Global Maritime Crime Program continues supporting member states tackling piracy and other maritime crime by offering technical assistance to build strong criminal justice and maritime law enforcement systems. I hope the report will be useful for all those involved in tackling and responding to crimes at sea, and that we will see an improved situation, including a legal finish, to emphasize that there should be no impunity to piracy or any other maritime offense. I congratulate the Stable Seas with this report and its 10th anniversary, and I wish you a fruitful panel debate. I thank you. Over to you, John.
Thank you very much for that, Siri. Thank you very much for those comments. And also, thank you for the exceptional work that UNODC has done in the past and continues to do in areas affected by piracy. So next, I'd like to introduce Ms. Liddell Joubert, who is the author of the State of Maritime Piracy for 2019. Liddell joined Stable Seas in November 2018, and this is her second report. She conducts research in global piracy, also trafficking in illicit goods, transnational organized crime, African maritime security, and maritime domain awareness. Liddell also brings firsthand experience from the private security sector and from the South African military. She holds an MA in International Affairs and honors in International Politics, and also a BA, all from the University of Pretoria in South Africa. And with that, I'll turn it over to Liddell.
Good morning. The State of Maritime Piracy 2019. At the time of writing, the world is in turmoil due to the outbreak of COVID-19. The shipping industry has been impacted in a myriad of ways. Thousands of seafarers and private armed security guards, unable to disembark from crew changes, are languishing at sea. All vessels have been impacted. The only thing that does not seem to be affected is the threat of maritime piracy and armed robbery of ships. Kidnapping of crew members continues in the Gulf of Guinea, as does robbery of ships in the Strait of Singapore and Malacca and at anchorages around the world. Now, the State of Maritime Piracy 2019 marks the 10th year that One Earth Future Foundation has assessed the human cost of maritime piracy. Over the last 10 years, the report has evolved from being first the project of Oceans Beyond Piracy and now belongs to the Stable Seas program. What has remained constant is our goal to explain and quantify the magnitude of these crimes and the profound impact piracy and armed robbery of ships have had on stakeholders, but mostly important, its victims, and to believe that ending violence at sea is possible. Executive summary. In 2019, the Gulf of Guinea remained the area worst affected by maritime piracy and armed robbery worldwide. The hijacking of the fishing dhow Al-Zazam in Somalia underlined the threat of piracy of Somalia. It underlined that it is eradicated and not suppressed. Violent incidents against fishing vessels, yachts, and cargo vessels were reported in Guyana, Trinidad, and Panama. Kidnappings of crew on fishing vessels by Abu Sayyaf and associated groups continued in the Zulu Seas, as did kidnappings of the Bangladeshi portion of the Sundarbans by criminal gangs. Robbery and attempted robbery of commercial vessels, but especially of tugs towing barges, increased in the Strait of Malacca and Singapore in 2019, with 34 reported incidents. East Africa. By 2010, piracy extended to nautical miles from the Somalian coast, as far as the Mozambican Channel and Madagascar. More than 1,000 hostages were taken in 2010 and 49 vessels hijacked. Attacks increased in 2011, but the success rate dropped significantly, with 40% fewer successful attacks and half the amount of hostages taken. 12 incidents of piracy and robbery of ships were reported in East Africa in 2019. One incident of hijacking was reported, during which the Yemeni-flagged dhow Al-Hazam was hijacked to be used as a mothership in attacks on 2 fishing vessels, which were both unsuccessful. NAVFOR apprehended the 5 suspected pirates and the 23 hostages were freed. For the suspects, 2 of the suspects have previously been arrested. Several other maritime security incidents unrelated to piracy were reported in the region in 2019. 2 attacks on fishing vessels southwest of Mogadishu could most likely be attributed to Al-Shabaab. Vessels were intercepted and detained by Eritrean forces and the Houthis in the Red Sea and by Iranian forces in the Straits of Hormuz. The Houthis are also used remotely controlled waterborne improvised explosive devices and sea mines against maritime traffic, and tankers sustained damage from explosives of the United Arab Emirates and Iran. One of the Iranian hostages from the fishing vessel Shiraz was released in 2019. 3 hostages from the Shiraz remained in captivity since March 2015. In November 2019, the pirate group holding them was attacked by a rival group. 2 of these hostages were seriously injured. At the time of last contact with the hostage support partnership, the situation was dire. West Africa. Piracy in West Africa is cyclical. Hijackings peaked in 2013 with 13 vessels hijacked, 8 were for cargo theft. In the last 10 years, crews were kidnapped from ships annually, except for the year 2011. It reached a peak in 2019. Although fewer incidents were reported in West Africa compared to 2018, a 60% increase in the number of crew members kidnapped were reported in 2019. Nigeria is at the epicenter of this problem in the Gulf of Guinea. Kidnapped crew members were held hostage in the Niger Delta in 2019. In 2019, the range of attacks with the intent to hijack vessels or kidnap crew extended from the Côte d'Ivoire in the west to Gabon in the south, and as far as 170 nautical miles off the coast. Attacks were often violent, and 5 deaths of crew members and Navy personnel were recorded. 4 vessels were hijacked, and 164 crew members were kidnapped during 30 incidents. In contrast to kidnapping incidents, the highest concentration of successful hijacking incidents in the last decade in the Gulf of Guinea occurred off Togo and Benin. In the last decade, kidnapping incidents have been concentrated off Brass and Boni, Nigeria. At least half of the successful kidnapping incidents were on vessels that have a permanent presence in the Gulf of Guinea, such as cargo ships, coastal tankers, offshore supply vessels, fishing vessels, and ro-ro passenger vessels. In 2019, the other half were visiting commercial vessels, tankers, container ships, bulk carriers, and cargo vessels. In total, 43 incidents were reported at ports and anchorages. High numbers of incidents of robbery and attempted robbery were also reported at Lagos anchorages in Nigeria. Vessels were hijacked and crew kidnapped from anchorages in Togo, Nigeria, Benin, and Cameroon. In total, 26 suspects were arrested for piracy and armed robbery in the region in 2019. Asia. High numbers of hijackings were reported in 2014 and 2015 in the Straits of Malacca and Singapore and its approaches. The majority of these were tankers. Kidnapping in the Sulu Sea peaked in 2016, and that year 17 cases were reported. 89 incidents were reported in 2019, 9 fewer than in 2018. Kidnapping incidents remained at 6 in 2019. All of these kidnappings were on fishing vessels, 3 of Sabah, Malaysia, and 3 of the Bangladeshi portion of the Sundarbans. The kidnapping of 12 fishermen from fishing vessels of Sabah, Malaysia in 2019 emphasizes that the threat of kidnapping in the Sulu Sea remains. The number of robberies and attempted robberies dropped significantly in the Straits of Malacca and Singapore between 2016 and 2018. 7 incidents were recorded in 2018. Of concern is the high number of robberies and attempted robberies reported in 2019. 17 incidents of robbery and attempted robbery of tugs towing barges were recorded last year, with more incidents recorded close to Johor. Attacks on 16 bulk carriers and tankers while underway were also recorded in the Straits. Almost half of robbery and attempted robbery incidents in Asia in 2019 occurred when vessels were at anchor. High number of incidents in previous years were reported at Samarinda anchorages in Indonesia and Chittagong anchorages in Bangladesh. No incidents were reported at either of these locations in 2019. Latin America and the Caribbean. We found an upward trend in armed robberies since 2014 due to robberies at anchorages of Venezuela and an increase in incidents against fishing vessels and yachts. Better reporting could also have contributed to this. In 2019, Stable Seas recorded 84 incidents of piracy and robbery in Latin America and the Caribbean, which is 1 fewer than the number reported in 2018. Only 3 of these incidents could be classified as piracy. In 2019, 14 fishermen were kidnapped during 4 incidents. 3 were off the southern coast of Trinidad and 1 was in the Mendoza River in Venezuela. Anchorages of Barcelona reported a high number of incidents in the early part of the year, and Callao, Anchorage, Peru, is reported a high number of incidents. Anchorages, crime against yachts made up 42% of all cases, which is roughly the same as in 2018. In 2019, violent incidents against yacht crews were reported of Panama. In 2019, a total of 14 suspects were arrested for robberies on fishing vessels, a cargo vessel in Guyana, and yacht cruises in Panama. All robberies were very violent and resulted in several crew members seriously hurt and some female crew members were sexually assaulted. There was also resulted in the death of sailors. I thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you very much for that, Liddell, and congratulations on a fantastic report. So now it's time to introduce our panel, and you can see our 4 distinguished panelists right below. We've asked the panelists to speak on the topic of what we've learned from past initiatives and what are the most pressing priorities for the next 10 years. So this discussion was set up ably by Liddell in her report. And now it's time to see what the experts feel are the main priorities going forward. And as you're sitting in the audience, and again, I know we have a lot of maritime experts in the audience, so we'd love to see your comments, but maybe consider 3 things to set this up. First of all, are there common themes that you'll see across the regions that are common to all the geographic areas, and are the priorities aligned in some of these areas? Or is each region specific enough that we have to look at different priorities? Second, do the priorities suggested by the speakers match what's actually happening? So when we have strategic efforts for capacity building and other things in each region, are those being addressed, what the speakers are talking about? And finally, if there are priorities that aren't being addressed, what are practical ways that we can take that forward, either through different fora or different activities? So I'll leave you with those 3 questions. And now I will introduce the panel. So we're trying something a bit new here. So what I will do a brief introduction of all 4 panelists. And then I will turn it over to the first panelist and we will automatically go to the next one. So again, I would ask, as we discussed, each of the panelists, when you're completed your remarks, to say something to the effect of, "This concludes my remarks," so that we can move to the next speaker. So if you would do that, it would help our technical crew here. And again, I would encourage you to put your comments or questions, and those questions we don't get to at the end, we'll try to summarize some of the comments and put those out in a couple days. So going on to the introductions, the first will be Mr. Simon Church. Mr. Simon Church is EU NAVFOR Special Advisor for Industry Relations and the former Director of the Maritime Security Center, Horn of Africa, otherwise known as MSC HOA. His principal role is to manage the strategic relationship with the maritime community and the shipping industry. He's been working at EU NAVFOR since the beginning of his mandate in 2008 and was instrumental in the creation and development of MSC HOA. His previous background is in commercial shipping, where he worked in a variety of roles over 20 years. The next panelist is Mr. Brian Wilson. He serves as Deputy Director of the Global Maritime Operational Threat Response Coordination Center, which is the U.S. government office that aligns maritime threat responses. He's also a visiting professor at the U.S. Naval Academy and a non-resident fellow at the Stockton Center for International Law at the U.S. Naval War College. He's drafted national level policy responses to maritime cyber attacks, illegal fishing, piracy, and facilitated dozens of tabletop exercises. He's a Fulbright scholar and has written on security issues in the Stanford Journal of International Law, Texas International Law Journal, Emory International Law Review, and the Harvard National Security Journal. He served 20 years as an officer and a lawyer in the U.S. Navy, where his assignments included Ocean Policy Advisor to the Undersecretary of Defense and an assistant to the General Counsel of the Navy. Next one over is Captain Harish Bahuguna. Captain Harish is the Director of the Information Fusion Center Indian Ocean Region, otherwise known as the IFC-IOR. And he served in this capacity since January of 2019. Over the last 5 years, he's actively worked on maritime security issues, including anti-piracy, coastal security, and offshore security issues. Captain Harish is a graduate of the Naval Academy and a specialist in communications and electronic warfare, and has had various operational training and staff tenures, including Naval Headquarters, in a career that spanned 25 years so far. He's also commanded a fast attack craft and been executive officer of a frigate. And last, we have Admiral Narciso Fastudo Jr. Narciso is the acting executive director of the Interregional Coordination Center in Yaoundé, Cameroon, otherwise known as the ICC. He's had a long history of Angolan armed forces, including duty in the Air Force and Navy. He's also worked in the Defense Ministry and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He's a member of the Maritime Standing Committee for the SADC. He has a PhD degree and has conducted postgraduate studies in the US, South Africa, and the former Soviet Union. From 2017, he's been involved in implementing the Yaoundé Code of Conduct, which was approved in 2013 at the Summit of Heads of State from West and Central Africa. So welcome to all our panelists. And once again, I would remind you to please indicate when your remarks are complete so that we can move to the next. And I would also encourage Q&A to happen. So type into that box while this is going on. So with that, I will turn it over to our first panelist. So Simon, over to you.
Good morning, and thank you, John, for the introduction. My name is Simon Church. I'm the Special Advisor for Industry Relations and the ex-Director of MSC HOA. I've been working at EU NAVFOR since its inception in December 2008. I'm joined today by colleagues here, Lieutenant Commander Diego Canavas, who is the coordinator for our Joint Operations Center, Lieutenant Colonel Enrique Villegas, who's Head of Intelligence, and by Melanie Ciotta from our media team. Over the next 7 to 10 minutes, I will take the opportunity to share with you some insights about how we see the future. How do we see the evolution of the piracy threat in the Horn of Africa region in the maritime domain? These insights are based on our 11 years of operating as a counter-piracy naval operation off Somalia. In other words, how do we see the future through the prism of success and failure, where we have been effective and why, and where we have found challenges and why. I will also outline what we see as those remaining challenges that we still face, and also touch upon the transferable nature of one counter-piracy model in one region to another. I only have a few minutes, so it's quite difficult to capture the thinking in 7 minutes. So without further ado, I will begin by outlining what I believe to be the ingredients of success of UNODC's operation. Next slide, please. So the first one is the inclusive cooperation and coordination with our military partners, both tactical and strategic, as well as, of course, with the shipping industry. One of the things that has underlined and reinforced our success from the beginning of our operation is the inclusive nature of our cooperation with our partners. And we believe that competition is the enemy of cooperation. Next slide, please. Of course, the military to industry partnership has been fundamental to our success. And one of the things that I would like to highlight when we're looking in other areas of the world is how important the reporting and response axis is. In other words, how vessels report incidents to us and how a military response is enabled because of the data and the information and the trust placed to our operation that allows us to act quickly in responding and deterring the crime of piracy. And that has been a fundamental part of the reason we've been successful. Next slide, please. Of course, the maritime security architecture is critical for that response. And in that architecture, it's the data and the value of that data that has allowed us to make informed operational response decisions and share that information with partners. And a lot of that information is confidential and privileged data that comes from the commercial shipping industry that have been forward-leaning from the beginning of our operation in 2008, because they understood that information was critical for us to be able to understand when the incidents were taking place and how we could respond to them in real time. Next slide, please. Defense diplomacy is a really important part of one of the instruments of influence that we have at our disposal, and we use and have used it effectively with many different partners throughout the region, whether it be the World Food Programme or whether it be also with third states and regional countries. Those partnerships have been crucial in being able to cooperate, build trust, and share information that allows us to cooperate with them, be it a legal finish or be it training. There are many different examples of that. Next slide, please. And finally, what we have referred to in EU circles for many a year, and we still hold to this premise, is the comprehensive approach or integrated approach. These ingredients are both sequential and indivisible. We have learned that not only are the ingredients necessary for the effects that we seek for mission success to deter piracy to the levels that can be contained, but we also know that they must be developed in sequence. For example, the cooperation with military partners had to be working and functioning before we could really encourage the shipping industry to follow guidelines like BMP, to follow procedures that we have put in place. We couldn't gain that trust until we demonstrated that we were coordinating together, acting against the same common enemy. We found out that influence within the region with littoral states in the Indian Ocean was critical in enabling their support to our efforts. And without it, the limitations would have been far greater. What still remains a challenge is the final ingredient for success I have listed, and that is the comprehensive approach. The EU has invested a lot of financial and political capital in securing the development flank in concert with military deterrence. EU's capacity building mission, has been restricted and hampered by the security situation within the country, limiting the scope of activities. And this is beyond their control, but it has been important in not enabling them to achieve the success they might have. And this has been coupled with the priorities of the federal government who lie elsewhere. Al-Shabaab, a dire humanitarian situation, and a fragmented state, to name just 3 other examples of the difficulties they have faced. So piracy has never really been the priority of the federal government. The focus on the maritime domain is also not necessarily a priority, and therefore the longer term impacts for which the construction of a funded, trained and sustainable maritime law enforcement capability is still difficult to envisage for those reasons. Turning to transferable models for counter-piracy from one region to another, I think we have too often made comparisons between regions that have assumed that we can take one model that works in the Horn of Africa and take the lessons of what has worked effectively here and then transpose them into a model for different regions. What I do think is more valuable is identifying key benchmarks that we know are only effective when they are in place. One such benchmark in place in the Indian Ocean is the building of trust with the shipping industry on the reporting of incidents. There needs to be reporting of incidents and a corresponding response axis that works in practice. Shipping companies will only provide data when they know the data is secure and that the users of the data will come to their aid. If piracy attacks reported do not result in successful interventions and attacks not being deterred, they will not use the reporting center and report those threats. Secondly, cooperation with the Somali Navy was not possible in the Horn of Africa because there isn't one. But in other regions, this is a critical relationship and must allow a regionally led approach, allowing regional navies to take credit for the success and ownership of law enforcement. And this is the only path to joint cooperation, in my view. But it also must be accompanied by a comprehensive or integrated strategy where development is used in concert with naval development, as an example. Finally, the legal finish must be achievable and effective if deterrence of piracy in any maritime domain is to have any chance of success. Catch and release is the price of doing business for organized crime cartels in the Indian Ocean, as one example. So with that, I will conclude my remarks, and John, I hand it back over to you. Thank you.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I'd like to first commend Stable Seas for an astonishing report. It is fantastic, and it addresses maritime security and piracy in formats that I have not seen consolidated, from the time of day of attacks to seafarers that have been victims, to different considerations spanning several years. I'd also like to commend UNODC, and good to see you again, Siri, and the great work that you've done globally to better position countries to address piracy. I want to talk about lessons learned over the past 10 years and then 10 considerations going forward. I think it's instructive when we look at piracy, and we've got wonderful questions already coming in. I wanted to thank you. When we look at piracy, where were we? And I think one attack is instructive for me, which was a cruise ship in 2005 off the coast of Somalia in Gulf of Aden that had a pirate skiff closing the gap on the ship. There were no warships in the area. There was no high-profile discussions of this attack, and the cruise ship was on their own, and they had preventative measures. They took security measures, and they used a long-range acoustic device, LRAD, and other measures, also high-profile water and high-intensity water. That event sparked interest, and it sparked a lot of focus on what do we need to do to protect ships? Whose responsibility is it? What's the role of the private sector? And how do we collaborate? Go to the next slide, please. So taking that lesson from the seaborne spirit, we saw Somalis were adaptive, and piracy is adaptive in every region. In this case, it was a quite expensive long-range acoustic or LRAD device that at least some Somali pirates could defeat with 30-cent earplugs. And they could adapt and respond to those security challenges. And when we look at piracy, I again want to commend Stable Seas for chronicling many years. And if we look at the day-to-day, you don't get the kind of perspective or insight that Liddell did a fantastic job. And I do encourage everyone on this call to look at, because if we do look day-to-day, you'll see what is on the screen, ups and downs. Piracy has gone up, it's gone down. How are we meaningfully seeking to suppress? We go to the next slide, please. So these are 10 things in my personal view that worked. And if we look at the seaborne spirit where there was no prosecution and bookend that to another attack with the Magellan Star. So a German-owned Antigua Barbuda flagged ship that had been attacked and successfully boarded. So in that case, we had a ship with Russian master, mixed crew, and a Turkish coalition ship in the area and U.S. Marines that ultimately boarded and apprehended 20 and made it safe for the ship and brought 9 pirates on board USS Princeton. And the question then was who was going to prosecute. So in that case, Kenya prosecuted and sentenced those pirates to 5 years in jail. But we have not had that type of diverse, distributed threat environment where so many different actors were involved. And that starts for the 10 things that worked. When we look at piracy, we've had in excess of 1,000 prosecutions. That's extraordinary. That is an extraordinary number when we're looking at it sequentially for many years. And I would encourage you to consider the role of the United Nations Security Council. In Somali piracy, it was not until 2008 that the first United Nations Security Council addressing piracy was adopted by the Security Council. So it was addressed in previous engagements, but Somali piracy was the first, and the Security Council has gone on to adopt approximately 18 on just Somali piracy, providing a legal ability to enter territorial sea, at times under very narrow parameters, but conduct operations on land. It authorized sinking of vessels. So it's extraordinary under certain circumstances, but I'd also like to echo what Simon said, and that's my third. There's no substitute for a naval presence, and that's what piracy operations highlighted to me. And aligning national efforts was another. So how do we harness your maritime administration, your Ministry of Justice, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, your Coast Guard? How are we going to harmonize the efforts from multiple agencies on the same page? And piracy wasn't the only reason, but it was a spark that at least 10 countries created or refined whole of government or interagency collaboration. So piracy had significant impact in that regard. I don't know that any other threat has had the sustained and innovative collaboration that we've seen with piracy. When we look at Interregional Coordination Center, and I'm very excited to hear that presentation in a little bit in Yaoundé. We see RECAP in Asia, Regional Agreement to Combat Armed Robbery and Piracy. We see different models, the contact group, bringing in private sector, public sector, militaries, coast guards in environments that we've never seen before. One other area that I do think is important to highlight is the financial flows, and that was, I believe, not immediate, but it came on about the Egmont Group and about financial intelligence units and how are we going to most effectively pursue money. because piracy is about money when it's lucrative. Another area I'd like to highlight is data, and that's where UNODC, Stable Seas, One Earth have been remarkable on providing the kind of data and the reports that we are seeing. It really is a global best practice. And another lesson that also Simon highlighted was different regions, different responses, and different challenges. Where in the Gulf of Aden, we have 18 Security Council resolutions decided under Chapter 7. Gulf of Guinea, there are 2. Last one was in 2012, and it didn't provide additional authorities. It encouraged collaboration and cooperation and called on different countries for that action. Go to the next slide. I think it's important when we look at the next 10 years, and that's what I was asked to both talk about what happened in the past and what's going forward when we take our cases like Seaborne Spirit and Magellan Star. It is encouraging now that we're seeing Nigeria prosecuting Halifan 2 under domestic law. But number one is do no harm. There are important collaborative frameworks that now exist that when we talk about altering the status quo, I think caution may be appropriate at times. And other times it's good to be creative, but it will start with an at-sea presence. We've seen documenting the process in the past. What happens after an interdiction? What happens in the first 24 hours? What will be decisions that each government needs to take? And seafarer treatment, we've seen with human rights at sea, has fantastically documented many things. I do think in the COVID environment, we're going to be resource constrained. And the question will be about maintaining interest in combating piracy and allocating sufficient resources to keep those operations and multilateral collaborative activities going. Unclear whether there will be a continued press on how will cyber conduct engagements. Several groups, including the Talon Manual, the NATO Center of Excellence has addressed, can that be an act of piracy if you use cyber means? We will see, can an unmanned vessel be a victim vessel under piracy? And I believe there will be continued presses on regulations and laws because that's what we do. And the continuing value of private security. So with that, the seafarer focus in economics, providing that value, why do we care? Why is this such an important issue that we can't take for granted that those will know? And that the more we can highlight and the more we can have that examination will be beneficial. And with that, my remarks are concluded. Thank you very much.
Hello, good day to everyone who is tuned into this webinar. Thank you, John, for giving me this opportunity. And congratulations to Team Stable Seas and UNODC, and particularly Lidl, for this comprehensive study just released. But before I come on to my topic, let me take a moment to introduce IFC IOR to you all. Next slide, please. We are a relatively young center, just about a year and a half old, and our vision is to emerge as a nodal center of excellence on all issues of maritime security in the IOR. Next slide, please. Our center is premised on collaboration for safety and security, with the primary focus on developing comprehensive maritime situational awareness in the region through seamless information sharing, primarily to queue incident responses, and all this towards a common goal of keeping the global commons safe and secure. Next slide, please. We do operate a website with the primary aim of disseminating maritime security information on a daily basis. We also come out with routine reports, analysis, and a monthly maritime security update, which we come out with, shared with our partners. We host international liaison officers at the center who are our strength and who bring in a lot of experience and expertise. We also have dedicated MDA analysts working with us at the center to help us in analyzing the maritime traffic. Next slide, please. I'm sure all of you would appreciate that IOR is a fulcrum of global trade. And as per the data that we have monitored at our center, as per the center's database, in 2019 alone, we observed close to 140,000 distinct AIS identity ships operating in the IOR. The ships that we have observed in other areas are also as shown on the screen. What it brings out that the maritime traffic in the area is only increasing and becoming denser by the day, and therefore it becomes incumbent to keep the seas open for all legitimate users. Next slide, please. Now let us have a look at the piracy trends over the last few years. If you look at the stacked graph from 2005 to 2020, we would find that the piracy peaked in the year 2011. And this is primarily because of the increase in piracy incidents from 2008 to 2011, in which the incidents of the on the east coast of Africa increased, which can be seen in green color on the screen. Next slide, please. A closer look at the piracy hotspots in the year 2008 and 9 clearly brings out the emergence of Horn of Africa as the major hotspot of piracy during that time. Next slide, please. Consequently, several regional and extra-regional forces and stakeholders came together to fight this menace jointly, and a number of regional mechanisms evolved over period. Some of the important regional mechanisms which continue to remain in force, in addition, and some new ones which have been added are now shown on the screen. Next slide, please. The Indian Navy was one of the earliest responders to commence the anti-piracy operations in the Gulf of Aden, along with other stakeholders. The last 10 years, we have deployed close to about 75 warships, have escorted close to about 4,000 merchant vessels, both Indian and foreign, thwarted 44 piracy attempts, and we have actively been involved in the proactive efforts have resulted in the HRA being revised in 2015 in concerted efforts with our partners, and subsequently shifting it further westward in 2019. In order to provide greater flexibility to our assets which are deployed for anti-piracy operations, the operating philosophy was changed from an escort cycle to a free patrol so that the ships which were deployed had greater autonomy of deployment. Of late, since 2018, we have also started contributing towards the United Nations World Food Programme, wherein we are escorting the ships in consultation with NAVFOR. Next slide, please. The combined efforts of various stakeholders has provided the desired results, and there has been a decline in piracy, as can be seen on the screen in 2019. The Horn of Africa just shows the number of incidents, which is barely about 2% of what the number was in 2008 and 9. Next slide, please. I would just like to capture some of the major factors which have contributed to this success. In my opinion, the recognition of piracy as a threat by the United Nations and the subsequent manifestation as the UNSCRS, and the fact that there was a willingness on part of all nations to contribute to this international effort has been a major factor. In fact, as on date, under various mechanisms, close to about 50 countries, both regional and extra-regional, are involved in this domain. The continued naval presence and the increased awareness and the compliance to BMP5 certainly is an area which has resulted in this success. However, I would like to highlight the significant contribution of mechanisms like the UKMTO and the MSC HOA, along with platforms like Mercury and the various forums like CGPCS and SHADE, which have helped in getting all the stakeholders onto a common grid and all of us working in the same direction. In particular, as regards the capacity building, the efforts in enhancing the domestic capacities of littorals, particularly towards the capacity building efforts in Somalia, have also been significant. Next slide, please. Though a lot of distance has been covered, I think that some of the challenges still confront us. One of the primary challenges which confronts us is the root cause of piracy yet remains to be addressed, and primarily because most of it remains under the surface. And as is known, anything which is invisible usually is the most important. We are also witnessing that the lines amongst the various threats are becoming blurred over time with the involvement of the non-state actors. There is a hybrid nature which is emerging, and as has already been brought out, some remotely operated skiffs and some unmanned boats are operating in this region. Another two challenges which I would like to highlight are the presence of dark ships and the identification challenges because of the small boats. The dark ship activities can certainly be countered to an extent by the use of satellite imagery complementing the AIS technology. And with regards to the small boats, I think that there has to be some regional and national level effort to come down on some kind of understanding to have transponders on all of them. I also find that the poor enforcement has been witnessed. That could primarily be because of the lack of resources. It could be because of a mismatch between the mandate and the resources on ground. There is also an over-reliance on physical surveillance, and there are gaps in legal finish, which again could be because of a mismatch between the responsibility and the authority on ground. However, one of the most important factors which remains is the need for a deeper engagement and information sharing between the various maritime security constructs which are operating in the region, and the need for developing a shared understanding of what, and for everybody to come onto a common grid. Next slide, please. A quick look at the road ahead in front of us. No country or no organization has the bandwidth or the capacity or the resources to handle all the maritime security challenges single-handedly. And therefore, the only solution available is collaboration and cooperation. And here I'm trying to highlight the need for resource sharing, the need for optimal utilization of available resources, and the need for pooling in of expertise so that we can benefit from each other's experiences. There is also a need for a whole of government approach, particularly at the national levels, and there is a need for all maritime stakeholders to be brought together under one umbrella, and an interagency coordination is the need of the hour. This aspect has repeatedly been brought out by several maritime security experts, and several recent reports of stable seas have also highlighted this many a times. At the domestic level, there is certainly a need for stringent anti-piracy laws. This I would like to say that India is already working on it, and December 19, they have already tabled the anti-piracy maritime law. At the international level, I think there is a need for regulation of floating armories and private security presently, which appear to be operating in a legal vacuum. The need to help in the development of capacity of our littorals is also a thing which needs to be focused upon. There needs to be a focus on electronic and remote surveillance, and this would be done and achieved by setting up coastal surveillance radar chains and AIS chains all along the coastlines. There is a need to jointly train with them and carry out regular training exercises. I'm sure that these factors put together will lead to an incremental improvement towards making the seas more safe and secure in our region. Next slide, please. To sum up, I would like to say that there is a need to develop robust institutional, legal, and strong monitoring frameworks all across the echelons, that is at the international, regional, national, and provincial levels. And the absence or the weakness of any one of them is going to have an adverse impact on the overall effectiveness of the maritime security umbrella. Next slide, please. The maritime domain, as we all would appreciate, is very unique. It is complex. It is dynamic in nature. There are overlaps. There are no barriers at sea. And therefore, issues have transnational linkages. Above all, it's a vast medium which is unsupervised. So these common challenges that all of us face call for a shared understanding. And it is here that centers like ours aim to work tirelessly along with our partners towards achieving SAGAR, that is security and growth for all in the region. This is a goal which has been articulated by our Honorable Prime Minister. Next slide, please. With that, I thank you all for your attention. I have concluded. Thank you once again for your patience and your time. Good day.
Good afternoon, everybody. For you, it's good morning. I have a problem with my camera. This is the reason the sound is coming like this. But speaking about the ICC, Inter-Regional Coordination Center, I would reduce my intervention only on two questions. The first one is lessons learned on the 10 years that we already started with only 3 years. Our center started in 2017. And the second question, we will speak about the program we will have from now ahead. Talking about the lessons, the navies around this area are under-equipped to go far. In the sea, and they could make better control of the sea, but also how to control the long and deserted beaches where pirates often dock after committing their crimes. We have a weak inter-administration and interagencies cooperation. And there is a lack of national maritime strategy in many countries. This brings to weak interoperability between customs, navies, maritime police, and in the different countries. The other thing is they have a weak sharing information. In different countries. Also, the issue of plastics pollutions and coastal erosion, and the non-implication of other stakeholders like tourism, scientific research, mine, industry, transport, insurance, and even the civil society. There is one ignorance of the tests relating to maritime domain. Also, in the field of work with coastal communities, we have to emphasize here the lack of infrastructure in certain regions, and the isolation of certain regions, which encourages anger among younger people, unemployment among the younger people, and their adherence to the acts of piracy. practice by large trawlers of foreign countries of fishing in the space reserved for artisanal fishing, which leads to the anger of the populations and their adhesion to the piracy. And the refusal by the petroleum companies located in the coastal localities to live up their promise, not only to pollute the sea, but also to employ the young people of those localities, which leads to the anger of the populations and their adhesion to the piracy. And now we will talk about the programming looking ahead. We advocate for equipment of Navy, Customs, and Maritime Police. We should do more agreements, memorandums of understanding with all administrations involved in maritime domain that clarifies the responsibilities. Also, we have to designate national maritime strategy and also sensitize the actors to reduce the use of plastics and to act on way of limiting coastal erosion and involve other actors such as tourism, scientific research, mine, industry, transport, insurance, because now Navy ahead of the work, and to install better information sharing system that could involve all actors. And the tests we have, we need to popularize them to people to know to maritime domain questions. And better work should be done on the field of coastal communities to create joint local communities. And advocate for the government to set infrastructures that will provide employment to young people and also reduce the isolation of those areas, those regions. And then advocate towards the government to sensitize the oil companies to avoid pollution at sea, but also to employ young people of those areas. And the government also to strong laws, rigid laws, punishing a trawler who comes to fish in the area reserved for artisanal fishing. Thank you, I finish.
Thank you very much for that, for all the panelists. I think all of those comments were very good on our theme of what has worked in the past and what lessons can we draw and what can we possibly take forward for priorities. I do want to point out that, as you notice, there's no consensus on what should be done, especially as we look across the geographic areas. And that's what makes this problem so challenging. So now we've gotten to our question and answer part, and thank you for the questions that you've put in. I want to go to a question first about the Indian Ocean, and I think I'll go first to Liddell and then to Simon, and then I'll open it up. I think Captain Harish, you'll probably want to come in as well. This question, I'm going to put a couple of them together, and I apologize, but I want to try to get a broader sense. So the first question has to do with risk, exactly how we characterize it. We've heard terms such as suppressed, mitigated, eliminated. So what do these terms mean? And can we be more concise on what we think the continuing threat is of piracy in the Indian Ocean. And it's kind of a follow-on, and I apologize, I'm going, but there are areas of instability both to the north, up in Yemen, having to do with the Houthis, and also south in Mozambique. So how is that complicating the problem? And I think that one question pointed out that we've already seen a decline in the use of private security and other things. So are we dropping our guard a bit, and what might be the outcome of that? So with that, again, this has to do with characterizing the threat, complications of the threat beyond piracy, perhaps from other challenges. And finally, are we dropping our guard? This has to do with the Indian Ocean. And so for the first answer, I'd like to, Liddell, can you answer based on your reporting?
Yes, how I see the threat in the Indian Ocean, there's several factors that suppress the threat at this stage. I mean, one, the presence of foreign navies, EU NAVFOR in the area, and armed guards on vessels. Often I find what I call a culture of piracy. That's areas where we have high crime and financial difficulties. And as soon as there's security is taken away from the area, we see a resurge of piracy incidents. We get countries with very similar situations where violence is high and crime is high and there's economic difficulties, but we don't find piracy. So I think capabilities of people in the area able to go into piracy, and then the absence of security measures can lead to piracy. So I think off the coast of Somalia, if the current security factors are withdrawn, we will see incidents again. The presence of other factors I commented to on the report, which some people I see have been questioning. There's often incidents as classified as piracy in the area, which is not. I mean, the incidents from the coast or from vessels from contributed to Al-Shabaab, incidents connected to the Houthis. We find everything in that area which complicated the situation. When is an incident piracy and when not is often not so easy if someone is on a vessel and have to evaluate the situation. The thing also about security guards going down, there's several factors contributing to it. Of Somalia, we see still a high presence of security guards on vessels. It has been impacted this last few months since March because of COVID, and some of this armories in that area are facing difficulties with COVID on board and unable to disembark. All of that has an effect on the situation, and I actually think a solution needs to be found for armed guards stuck on armories at this stage.
Thank you, Liddell. Let's go over to Simon and then Captain Harish. I think you should comment on this as well.
Yeah, I think Liddell made some really good points there regarding how we see the current threat and the impacts of COVID, which we are also monitoring. We're still gathering data on that. There have been instances or examples of restrictions placed upon the rotations of armed guards on and off floating armories, both in the southern Red Sea and also in the Gulf of Oman. That has placed pressures on security providers. It's having an impact on the cost. And there are other factors that the shipping companies are taking account of in terms of the health and safety of their crews in relation to protecting them from armed guards that may not be pre-COVID tested. So those are some of the factors that are driving a different pressures onto that business model. How do we see how do we characterize the risk, I think is one of the questions you asked. One of the things that we've always been very careful to do is to characterize risk in terms of the risk to the vessel. So this is how vessel owners evaluate their risk, the risk from piracy, the piracy threat. But what we focus on is that collective understanding, both from our threat assessments that we provide together with CMF, those releasable threat assessments that we work so hard to try and validate. And that's why we call them threat assessments and not risk assessments. But just turning quickly to the Somali piracy threat, you asked the question of how do we see that? And one of the issues is the lack of events and incidents have often been misleading in not describing and accurately describing what the threat is. The business model for piracy still is there because there is opportunity, intent, and capability. The intent is not being activated, but the opportunity depends upon the number of vessels that are potentially targets, because they will activate that opportunity when they can. The reason we know that is because we have an understanding of some of the pirate groups and what how they are active in other crimes. This is one of the reasons why NAVFOR's mandate is considering an adjustment to treat other maritime crimes, specifically weapons trafficking and narcotics. And one of the reasons why this is being considered is because of that analysis that we know exists between the transnational nature of crimes that go from country to country. And one example, of course, is Yemen and the trafficking of weapons to and from Somalia from Yemen. So in short, the piracy threat is complicated by the security situation, specifically in Yemen, but also within the country. We see that hopefully an adjusted mandate will give us better tools to address that.
Okay, thank you, Simon. Over to Captain Harish.
In continuation of what Lydell and Simon just brought out, I would echo the sentiments. The threat will continue to remain so long as the root causes are not addressed. And as Simon correctly brought out, as so long as the capability, intent, and opportunity exist, the risk of piracy cannot be assumed to be over. Now, this challenge will continue to exist so long as the answer is found, and probably in terms of economic stability in the region. Also, so while we see that there are no piracy incidents in the region since May of 2019, and only some suspicious approaches, primarily it is the suspicious approaches which are being observed in the region, we may be very eager to jump to the conclusion that all is well and piracy is under control. But probably that may be maybe far from the ground reality actually. So it may be appropriate to say that the choice of word to say that piracy, the potential for piracy exists. However, it is not manifesting on ground per se, primarily because of the DMP5 compliance, primarily because of the continued naval forces presence in the region. Also, we probably should be wary of the changing nature and the changing dimension of the threats in the region, as been alluded by speakers, probably by Simon before me, that the nature of the distinct boundaries between the crimes and between the threats in the region is no longer there, and there is a merging of the threats in the region, which only makes the situation more complicated and more complex. I would just like to say that, in a nutshell, I would like to say that, it is something like the piracy state presently is like a dormant volcano. It is not an extinct volcano as of now. It would be too early to say that, it's extinct. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. And we're going to move to the next question. I know some of the other panelists might want to come in, but we have a couple questions that we'll pick on them here. So I'll say the next two questions just to give a heads up to the panelists. We have, and these are probably for Brian Wilson first to address, having to do with the role of the UN. One question we had was about the successful and aggressive way the UN addressed Somali piracy, which is different than how it's being addressed in the Gulf of Guinea. And is there a role for the UN Security Council, and should that be driven by regional states perhaps? Also touching on the UN, and I apologize, Brian, the definition of piracy and UNCLOS, is it fit for purpose? Is it helping us? Is it something we should take a look at? And before you answer, Brian, I'll give a heads up to the Admiral. We've also had a couple questions on the Gulf of Guinea in particular, and what seems to be an impatience from some of the people writing in about the movement of things there as far as making the piracy situation better. And can we just move some of the things we learned in Somalia over to the Gulf of Guinea? Or are there complications on why that can't happen? So I'll give you a little warning, Admiral, you'll be next. But first, let me turn to Brian Wilson on the questions of the UN. And I hope I've given you enough to start with. Over to you, Brian.
Yeah, thanks so much. When we look at the situation in Somalia that dealt with a fragile to failed state, depending on your perspective, and also a situation where states in that region were incapable or unable to effectively address the threat. There were multiple countries that did seek enhanced authorities, including the transnational federal government, TFG of Somalia, that affirmatively went to the United Nations and said, here's expanded authorities because of our inability to address that threat. If we look at how the Security Council has never had one resolution on Asia, on piracy or armed robbery in Asia, and in as I noted very briefly in the Gulf of Guinea, there was a subsequent presidential statement in 2016 that addressed piracy and armed robbery at sea, and again implored the importance of collaboration and cooperation. So we've got an admiral on the line, but when we look at any response to be effective, needs regional states to seek and support that activity. We had that in the Gulf of Aden with the 18 resolutions that began in 2008, and so too with the Gulf of Guinea. I would not to answer a question with a question, but what do you want to change tomorrow? Because we have that in Somali piracy. Countries wanted the ability to go into the territorial sea. They wanted a legal mandate. They wanted the legal ability to sink ships. And that is what the United Nations provided. In the Gulf of Guinea, we have states now that are taking action. Different question whether it's effective. Different question whether or not more could be done. But right now, do we need that authority from the United Nations? And I do think that will be a question debated. But I think you need to really look at what the countries in the region want. The unique architecture in Gulf of Guinea and West Africa is something, when I put do no harm, going forward, that is West Africa right now is they've got a framework that does work. They have zones and regions that do not exist anywhere on Earth. And I think that's something to be valued. So whether or not it's where they want to be today, maybe not, but they are seeking prosecutions and Interregional Coordination Center. For those who haven't visited Yaoundé, it's a brick and mortar building and they have different teams. To me, it's fantastic effort. And I know it remains a work in progress, but folks there have been dedicated about collaboration, points of contact. And I know with the MDAT-GOG, another long acronym, and I apologize, Maritime Domain Awareness for Trade in the Gulf of Guinea about reporting, there are genuine efforts to change the narrative and to improve security. So with that, before I get into the law of the sea question, I want to see if the Admiral had any comments.
Okay, well, at this point, we'll turn over to the Admiral. And again, basically the question is, can we move some of the things that were successful in Somalia over to the Gulf of Guinea? And kind of the second part is, would that be welcome by regional states? And so I'll turn it over to you, Admiral.
Okay, thank you. The process started with two United States resolutions. The first one was 2011, and the second one was 2012. In 2011, the UN resolution encouraged the local states to start patrolling and then start taking responsibility of the threats that happen around the Gulf of Guinea. And in 2012, another resolution that in the same way led to the summit for the three communities, so I mean Central Africa, West Africa, and one political organization that is called Gulf of Guinea Commission. All of them, in this summit, they create this center, ICC, Interregional Coordination Center. So the process is going slowly because only in 2017, the center was it was inaugurated in 2014, but people started working in 2017. It means 3 years work. So the security is not a finished product. It means we have to build the trust among us, the countries, and then among us with the partners. So there is a different environment from that was in East Africa, in Somalia. So here there are too many countries in small pieces of land, of sea that constitutes the Gulf of Guinea. And then even in population and maybe the resource, this area is more wealthy than that one. So it means many people interest, the stakeholders, and they come also to help. But this is also the opportunity for other people that don't come to help. They have opportunity to make their business. Is the reason those things, it will be like cooperation mixed with competition. So we cannot have the same result that in Somalia. Escort here will not work because our sea is open. It means many ways to arrive to the port. Those questions I raised there, it means that before this time, there was not an idea to have a rising piracy here. It is the reason now we are facing this threat, and now we are studying and improving. But UN can be more helpful if we got political support from the states that can really help. We heard about the first experience, M.Go. There was another experience, cooking, that is about to finish in next year. But even our partners that work straight with us, they also are improving the way of working here in Gulf of Guinea. It's to say that things are going better because we were learning from the other centers, and this center is still under construction. It come to make coordination between West Africa and Central Africa, the two regions that share the Gulf of Guinea. But not in all states are the same interests at sea like in the other states. Even the threats are different in one area and another. And this leads to a different approach for the local states. But now we are communicating more, we are sharing more information than 2-3 years ago. It means that things are improving. The other very important question is related to the infrastructures. And this question of if infrastructures go until the legal finish, because we have not a big number of the cases of the people that were caught and went till the final to pay a fine or to be in prison. So even people say that information is confidential or it is sensitive. Is the reason we cannot say how much it's paid for one ransom, one person kidnapped, and so on. So this is the summary of that question. Thank you.
And thank you. And based on time, I'm sorry, Brian, I might ask you to cover the question on UNCLOS definition, perhaps in a written form if I could, because I think we have time for one more question, which I'd like everybody to comment on. So I think we'll go around the horn, perhaps in the same order that we did the briefs. So the question has to do with bringing in other actors to help fight piracy. And here at OBP and later on at Stable Seas, we've talked about moving from multilateral, which is countries cooperating, to multi-stakeholder, which is countries and industry and NGOs and seafarers and everyone cooperating. Some of the panelists have discussed, and I know Simon has, sequentially building trust. That is necessary. And I know the Captain Harish had this slide with the fish, which by the way is a fantastic piece of work worthy of the Pentagon, that showed the progression of bringing in other stakeholders. So what I'll ask is very briefly, if each speaker, and we'll start with the panel, so we'll start with Simon and then go to Brian, but discuss what actors should be involved in fighting piracy and how we can bring them together. So over to you, Simon, very quickly, please.
I'll try and be brief. I've got no fish, but I'll try and make up for that. Well, you saw my slide, the first one, which is about inclusive cooperation with partners. We have focused on building a network-centric approach. We used to have 11 warships, believe it or not, 11 warships, force generated in support of our operation all those years ago. We now only have 1 to 2, but one of the reasons why we're effective is because we depend upon the network and building the collaboration with partners, but regional states, as well as other navies. And of course, industry is at the center of this because they are who we are trying to protect. But we are increasingly dependent on those countries, but also with other programs, like programs run by UNODC, by the IMO, by Interpol, even with WFP, we have a special memorandum of understanding. Again, it's about accessing established relationships, building on that cooperation. So it's a combination of naval diplomacy, capacity building, as well as operational deterrence. So that's how we operate now, and that has to be also how we see the future. Thanks.
Thank you, Simon. Over to Brian.
Thanks, John. I really like this question because I think it highlights the different approaches to piracy. And if we look at one group that has been discussed today, SHADE, S-H-A-D-E, Shared Awareness for Deconfliction of Events, it was so effective to bring together NGOs, operational units, countries that often aren't in the same room. So effective, it was brought into to Europe to address migration. That to me is a legacy from Somali piracy going forward on how are we going to meaningfully tailor responses for threats and challenges in different areas. We've seen the way if you're an archipelagic nation, you may address piracy and information sharing and armed robbery a little bit differently. But as to what units are good, it still also starts with the law and building that network and that trusted group. So I'm sensitive on time and look forward to responding on the law of the sea question, one of my favorite topics on the definition, which I will say has been raised repeatedly, and I would encourage those, and I will put this in my answer, suppression of unlawful acts against safety of navigation. SUA has been supported at least 30 convictions, prosecutions and convictions for piracy. So where piracy, and there's 166 states parties, 1988, so where there may be inadequate laws nationally, there should be, if you're a party to SUA 88, some legal ability and removing some of the hurdles with private ends, two-ship requirements, location, and mindful of time. Thanks again to Stable Seas for the opportunity to speak. Fantastic report, Ledell, and congratulations.
Yeah.
Thank you, Brian. And now over to Captain Harish.
Yeah, thank you, John. Security is everybody's business. So there are several stakeholders, several mechanisms, maritime security constructs, and few fusion centers which have come up. And the primary requirement would be that in the maritime domain, I don't think that we should be averse to an overlap, because it's so vast that the more the merrier. In fact, the requirement is that all these stakeholders need to come onto a common platform. As I brought out earlier, there is a need for a deeper engagement amongst all these maritime security constructs or fusion centers, and everybody to be speaking the same language. Now here, probably if it is steered by somebody, then it would be much easier that everybody speaks the same language, everybody comes onto the same grid, and instead of duplicating efforts, if we are able to share each other's expertise, pooling resources and utilize the resources optimally, probably we would be heading in the right direction. And lastly, I would say that, leveraging and harnessing the technology to our advantage should be the way ahead. With that, thank you so much, and thank you Stable Seeds and UNODC and John for giving us this opportunity. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Captain. And over to Admiral.
Thank you very much for the webinar. It was a very good experience for us to share some ideas. I want to commend the organizers of this event, and maybe next time, if the COVID will not finish, we have to start going with this way of working. I would like to say that in our work to identify the threats and give them to the punishment, we have find some difficulties because our partners, our friends are still working with the old way. The old way, I say, there was not a regional organization. And then they go straight to the countries. It means that they are not helping the regional cooperation. Only 2 or 3 examples we can say that people worked very well. That is open game exercise. They pull everybody together working from the common result. But some organizations still go only one way, and they forget the other intervenients. This is the cause that is making difficult us to work, because the institutions that were created should be used for something. Also, I would like to say that among the organizations that work straight with the Gulf of Guinea, we have to mention UNODC, that is helping a lot. And the other one that we can mention also is the United Nations, United States Africa Command, and they should also continue with their work. They will see the outcomes and results. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Admiral. And we are just a bit over, but I want to say a few thank you. First of all, to Ledel Joubert, who wrote the excellent report that provided the basis for this discussion. And I would encourage you to read it. It's been released yesterday, I believe. Also like to thank the Stable Seas team, including Dr. Curtis Bell, Maisie Pigeon, in addition to Ledel. Like to thank the panelists for your inputs. I thought this was a very useful discussion, and thank you for those that provided comments as well as questions, and I'm sorry that we weren't able to get to them. What I can tell you is that this will be posted on YouTube, so you can watch this presentation again. We will also have a one or two, probably a two-page summary coming out of this, where we will provide some of the comments that we received through the Q&A and the questions. And I'm going to ask the panelists if they could to stay online just a bit after this, and we'll discuss what that might look like. But I hope you all stay safe. And again, thank you from our team here in Denver, Colorado, and hope you enjoy the rest of your day or evening. This concludes our webinar. Thank you very much to all.